I'm a geographer, and I'm doing my PhD study at Linköping University. I will be finished in 2 weeks, hopefully, and defend my thesis called Ordo ab Chao, the Political History of Biofuels in the European Union, Actors, Networks and Strategies. The aim with this thesis has been to analyze actors involved, problems and solutions that these actors argue about in the process, and how they are done to mobilize support for their positions. I've used an analytical frame in this study where I have mapped out actors and networks involved, who sets the agenda and initiates the political problem to be solved, what are the triggering events in the process, what are the characteristics of the actor network, and what are the resource exchanges between the actors involved. I've done document studies and reconstructed the political process. I followed the issue of climate change, energy security since the 1950s, and the development of the biofuels policy in the European Union between 1992 till 2012. I will now present history on how the climate issue became a priority for the European Union, and also the solution in form of biofuels. This history is connected to a number of triggering events. To explain a trigger event, I use the Dutch professor Peter Winsemius' policy life cycle for environmental issues. This can be used to, as a tool to gain an understanding of the political process and how key actors are involved. The term trigger event is though used by a lot of other political scientists. Winsemius' policy life cycle was developed in the late 1980s to gain an understanding of how environmental problems was acknowledged, went through the political process, how the legislation was implemented, and how the environmental problem finally was put under control. The trigger event highlights a problem that has been warned about by scientists, think tanks, and activists. The event puts it on the agenda, but sometimes this don't have to be a real event. It can be created for the purpose. In this process, there are a lot of actors that are mapped out, but they are interested in this issue. Transnational companies, lobbyists, non-governmental organizations, think tanks, research institutes, philanthropic foundations, interparliamentary organizations, international organizations, European Union institutions and member states, and some more. It's a very complex game. I will now start to talk about climate change as a political issue. In the case of the question of man-made global warming, this was presented as a problem as early as in the 50s, but it was in the 70s it became a more political issue. The United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in 1972 was an important event for this. As I have mapped out, the two think tanks, the Aspen Institute, an American institute, and the Club of Rome were very important players in this. The Secretary General of our conference, Maurice Strong, was a member of these organizations that were very influential in shaping the environmental agenda before and after the conference, together with financing foundations like the Rockefeller and Ford Foundation, that had started environmental programs in the 60s. The idea to the conference pamphlet, Only One Earth, by Barbara Ward, originated from the Aspen Institute. Interestingly enough, this very influential institute concerning environment was at the time led by the oil man Robert O. Anderson from the Atlantic Richfield Corporation. Other prominent people at this institute was, for example, Robert McNamara and Henry Kissinger. At the Stockholm conference, environmental problems was presented as issues that needed closer international cooperation to be solved. The climate was not high on the agenda, but initiated through reports such as the study of critical environmental problems and the study of man's impact on the climate. These reports were edited by MIT professor and Club of Rome member Carol Louis Wilson. The aim of these reports was to investigate how human impact could create environmental problems. Both cooling and warming of the climate due to human activity were discussed and written about in these reports. Wilson was also involved in the influential Club of Rome report Limits to Growth, that was released in the same year. This predicted shortages in energy if consumption was not limited. This conference ended and resulted in the creation of the United Nations Environmental Programme. This organization was then headed by Maurice Strong. So they kind of took their own people and created an organization that they put their own man in. This paved the way for a more ambitious effort to highlight the climate in the 80s. When we come to a year after this, 1973, the first oil crisis. In 1973, the oil crisis hit. It was a triggering event that highlighted the problems that had been discussed the years before. The oil crisis could be seen as a confirmation of the problems presented in books like Limits to Growth. One interesting fact is that the oil crisis scenario was actually discussed at a Bilderberg meeting the year before. And the Aspen Institute had prepared a plan for handling this on an international level, also the year before. They claimed, they later wrote about it, that they were kind of prophetic. This was, however, not a real shortage of oil. It was just a political decision by the Arab states, so no physical shortage. But still, it made the perception for the public that this was a big problem. And it created incentives to start the International Energy Agency and policies to find alternatives to oil, for example, biofuels and nuclear. As early as 1974, the Swedish Prime Minister Palme warned about the threat of climate change and said it would be the big issue around the year 2000. A process began with a number of UNEP and VMO-coordinated conferences at this time. The agenda was, though, to a big extent shaped by the climate program at the Aspen Institute, in cooperation with the Club of Rome affiliate IFIAS. The funding to this came from the Rockefeller Foundation. The head of the program was Walter O. Roberts. He was also a member of both the Aspen Institute and the Club of Rome. Other prominent people involved in this program was Stephen Schneider, Herman Flawn, and William Kellogg. Kellogg had also been a part of this study of man's impact on the climate report before. In 1979, the second oil crisis resulted in a dramatic increase in the price of oil. The 3 Mile Island incident created a backlash against nuclear energy as a solution. At this time, the first World Climate Conference was held in Geneva. The conference conclusions was to a great extent based on the study of man's impact on the climate report from 1971. This is according to William Kellogg from the Aspen Institute that also shaped the agenda for the conference. The conference set the ground for the World Climate Program. At this time it kind of heated up a bit, and some politicians were started to get more interested. They also gone from the cooling to the warming. A decision was kind of taken. And at this time, the European Commission began to part discussions to solve the problem with policy measures. In 1986, we had the Chernobyl accident. The same year, we saw a dramatic fall in the price of oil. The threat of man-made global warming was now becoming an issue for the European community and was now initiated in the European Parliament by proponents from the nuclear industry. The threat of global warming was in this context framed as a more pressing issue. The resolution from the Parliament proposed support to renewable energy systems such as biofuels to combat climate change. The soon-to-be head of the IPCC the same year suggested a carbon tax. This was later considered as a brilliant idea by more taxation-hungry politicians. In 1987, the Brundtland report, Our Common Future, was presented and addressed the concept of sustainable development. This commission was led by Gro Harlem Brundtland with main author Jim McNeill. Maurice Strong was also involved with the commission. To support the aims, the report proposed funding of environmental organizations by foundations and governments. The same year, 2 important meetings was arranged by UNEP and VMO in Village and Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center. The meetings were funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the German Marshall Fund. These developed policy recommendations to deal with the climate issue. During the summer heat in the United States in 1988, Jim Hansen from NASA presented the climate problem to the US Senate. This was held just before the VMO climate conference in Toronto and a big European climate meeting. This was one way the alleged problem was sold to the public. 1988 wasn't actually that warm at all. But this made it got attention. And later that year, the IPCC started with Bert Bolin as chairman. And without any proof of a problem, a carbon tax was decided by the Swedish parliament. This was copied by Norway and Denmark the following year. And now we come to 1989, the year after. In 1989, climate campaigns started by the leading environmental organizations Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, before they hadn't uttered a word about climate. They now brought alarm to the issue, but had been prepared to give it support from the public. This year sees the founding of another important actor, the rather unknown parliamentarian network GLOBE. This is trilateral and involves parliamentarians in the US, European Union and Japan with the goal of implementing sustainable development policies. And the politicians in this, they come from every parties. Conservatives, the Greens, the Socialists, and so on. This organization has had, as I can see in my material, a very big impact on issues like energy and climate in the European Union. From 1990 to 1992, this was led by Al Gore. And the European Charter was during the biofuel policy process, and also when the climate was high on the agenda, by the Club of Rome co-president Anders Wijkman. GLOBE is futuristic and promotes market solutions to environmental problems. The parliamentarians should in advance be informed about the agenda playing out. Funding has come from foundations like the European Climate Foundation and transnational companies like Unilever and Dow Chemicals. Today, interestingly, it shares its international headquarters with the British think tank the Fabian Society and is headed by a conservative, Lord Deben. Really strange mix of people, one can say. The parliamentarians connected to GLOBE has had a leading role in the policy process concerning climate and energy issues like biofuels. In 1990, Jacques Delors. The Commission was led by him, and they drew up a new energy plan for the new century. The advice for this plan came from a group of Club of Rome and Trilateral Commission members. Delors himself were a part of these organizations, including Aspen, France. Delors talked about these matters this year, where he said that he supported the idea of a world government and said that the European Union was the first step toward this goal. The community was said to be a testing ground for new forms of governance, where non-governmental organizations should have a bigger place. Biofuels was at this time put on the agenda as a solution. Biofuels was long before the policy process started considered to have limitations, and the Brundtland report in 1987 stated that environmental problems would increase with the development of renewable energy systems. The Commissioner, Christiane Scrivener, stated in 1992 that biofuels would only be able to reach a 5% share of the market. Despite these opinions, a long work started to investigate the options and develop biofuels in the early 90s. This was based on policy recommendations from Village and Bellagio in 1987, as well as a policy to support the European agricultural sector. The Reforix was concerned with a response to the alleged climate threat and the decisions that were made to limit carbon dioxide emissions. Investigations on the potential started by the Commission and resulted in the white paper Energy for the Future, Renewable Energy Sources. In 1998, the Parliament made a resolution that supported the development of renewable systems. A funding program to support environmental organizations was started at the same time. This could be seen as connected to the recommendations from the Brundtland report. In 2000, a triggering event spurred to action. At the wake of the millennium, a sudden price hike on oil made the issue enter the policy process. The oil that had been cheap through the 90s now became a lot more expensive. This was connected to a decision from OPEC to withdraw oil from the market, together with Norway and Mexico. The new situation demanded action. According to the Commissioner Loyola de Palacio, the new energy policy that had been prepared the years before could now gain the needed support. For the transport sector, it was said to be urgent, and a proposal for biofuels directive was presented. Optimistic assumptions said that biofuels could deliver up to 20% of the transport energy needs in 2020. The biofuels directive was decided in 2003 with a goal of 5.75% biofuels till 2010. Globe had a big influence on the issue in the Parliament. Although the triggering event was higher oil price, the goal of a directive was in the end framed as a way to reduce carbon dioxide emissions and reach sustainable development. In the end of the process, Globe called for sustainability criteria for biofuels production. This had also been a demand from some environmental organizations. In 2005, as preparations were made for the Renewable Energy Directive, the climate was high on the agenda. The Hurricane Katrina and floods in Central Europe was triggering events that supported the need to develop renewable energy systems. The Commissioner Stavros Dimas now said that renewable energy was a key to win the fight against climate change. The developing countries would also benefit from this biofuels boom. Members from Globe had been involved in the preparations from the beginning, even before the process began in the Parliament. The corporate partner to Globe, Unilever, was now complaining about the use of biofuels from palm oil as it threatened their need of raw material. Unilever is the biggest importer of palm oil in Europe or the world, so it's very important for them. But in the beginning, everything was fine. Barroso here. In 2007, the European Union presented a new strategy with 10% biofuels in the transport energy mix to 2020. Biofuels was a way to solve a lot of problems. The Commissioner Dimas now said a new car park was needed in Europe in order to fight climate change. A shift was, however, approaching. The goals now came under attack from the environmental movement. Biofuels were said to be a crime against humanity, bringing rainforest destruction, killing orangutans, and raise the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere due to land use change. By some, like Greenpeace, it was framed as a climate time bomb, and especially the use of palm oil to biodiesel was seen as the big problem. This was especially claimed by environmental organizations from the Netherlands and Britain. Biofuels was also blamed for higher food prices. The OECD and the World Bank released reports that made a connection between biofuels and food prices. This was highlighted in the media, seen as fact, and echoed by environmental organizations. This was escalating at the same time as the sustainability criteria for biofuels were discussed in the European Parliament. Directly responsible as rapporteurs in the parliament was 2 members from the Globe network. They wrote the reports and opinion. In the final document, they included criteria that was prepared by Globe's own biofuels working group. Globe cooperated with Unilever as well as the World Bank. We were also cooperating with leading environmental organizations like the European Environmental Bureau. In this process, environmental organizations has raised public concern for problems with the production and later worked to follow up the implementation. They have in this way acted as a police force in developing countries, bringing the evidence to Europe. This has been very obvious in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, where Britain and Netherlands has had big interests. So we can see the connection between why we have these environmental organizations from these countries involved. The leading environmental organizations have in this process received money from the Commission, national governments, and big foundations. When I made a study on Friends of the Earth, I found out that only 4% of their income came from their members. Almost everything came from the Commission. In this way, this organization has been very resource dependent. They have in this way became a part of a structure and played a role, serving needs of other stronger actors. And I say that this their independence can be very questioned. In the late 2008, the prices on food went down again. A Commission report said that the biofuels boom couldn't be blamed for the recent price hike. It was said that this was pure price speculation. The amount of palm oil for the use of biodiesel was also very low at the time of the big campaigns. It was only talk about what would happen in some years if they had a biofuel expansion. It was not based on any facts. The leading expert on biofuels, Andrew Fye, says that the environmental movement know that their campaigns are not based on facts, but keep on doing it because of the media exposure. However, the result of the political process was that the sustainability criteria was developed for the international trade with raw material. It also supported surveillance mechanism. For Unilever, it has been important to prevent palm oil from being benefited. For other actors like Globe and the Club of Rome, it has also been a case of promoting ideas of global governance. This is the very complex network of Globe. I don't think I can explain it now. I think it will take some hours to do that. But it's very complex, and it's a lot of actors involved in this. Now they are connected. Before it was, from the beginning it has been with the Club of Rome, but now they are World Bank and UNEP and the International Union of Conservation of Nature, and the European Climate Foundation, London School of Economics, and even the media, BBC. This organization was also invited by Tony Blair in 2005 to the meetings of the G8 group. In my study, I have found 3 important networks that has been involved. In these 3 countries has had a major impact on the legislation concerning biofuels. This is Netherlands, Britain, and the United States. They have in this led the criticism, and organizations from these countries were among the most influential. I can say that to promote biofuels, Germany was a very big part. International organizations and institutions like World Bank, World Watch Institute, OECD, G20, Club of Rome, Charter Commission has also had a major impact. If you follow the reports that initiate the problems, they are kind from these networks. The environmental organizations has not led these efforts. They have more become an important resource for the dominant actors. They have received resources to act from these sources. As Björn Stigson, leader of World Business Council on Sustainable Development, has said, NGOs must get involved in helping to find the situations that work and cooperate with industry in implementing them. The days when NGOs could remain on the outside looking in, like theater critics on opening night, are gone. Now, they must join the cast of a play in helping to put on an award-winning performance. In the process, Globe has been connected to almost every important actor on the arena. And in the process, triggering events has been important to gain support and start the policy process. But the thing is, everything has been prepared before. The triggering event hasn't done anything to actually create new policy. They just give it a mandate to gain it up on the political arena. This has contained problems and solutions initiated by the triggering events, one thing leading to another. One of the important end results is international agreements and global governance. And this is something that powerful and interlocking organizations and foundations like the Club of Rome, Aspen Institute, Rockefeller Foundation, and the Trilateral Commission has wanted to achieve from the beginning. And I would say that Globe has been a very effective tool to achieve goals like this. And this, I would say, puts important question about legitimacy and control of the decision making. Is this something that is consistent with a democratic society? What does this powerful actors want? Control the world, control the taxation and global trade. The question is, who regulates them? I will now end this presentation by go back to biofuels. The history of biofuels has not ended, but the boom has been shattered for now. In 2012, the Commission was back to the 5% target of biofuels that Commissioner Christiane Scrivener said would be most that could be achieved in 1992.